Alright, so we've been keeping up with the ongoing disruptions to the American airline industry, where we have been seeing thousands and thousands of flights canceled or delayed over the last couple of weeks and months. It especially got worse over the recent July 4th holiday weekend, and we've also gotten the opportunity to hear from some top political figures like Bernie Sanders and John Fetterman, who have been actually putting forward substantial policy measures that could be put in place to begin the process of holding these corporations accountable for basically committing fraud and lying to passengers to cover up for their own corruption and greed throughout the duration of the pandemic. And more recently, we got a response from Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, the guy who is really responsible for transportation across the United States. And his response to the proposals from Bernie Sanders and John Fetterman was predictably, laughably pathetic. And so we're going to get to that clip here in a second. But before we do that, I just want to lay a little bit of the groundwork in terms of what is causing the current disruptions that we are seeing right now, and what potential solutions have been proposed by guys like Bernie Sanders. So here to start us off, we got a clip from NBC News on these pilots who are actually in Atlanta, Georgia, my home city here, who are going on strike.
Walking information picket lines at 7 airports nationwide today, off-duty Delta pilots in contract talks who say they're working excessive overtime as the airline tries to fly its schedule without enough pilots.
Those are fatiguing schedules, working as hard as we can.
Delta, United, and American have struggled since Memorial Day. More than 3,000 total cancellations just since Sunday morning.
We don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of time. So when you do that, there goes your vacation.
In an email to customers, Delta CEO today said this level of disruption and uncertainty is unacceptable.
That's awesome. Okay, I love that response. It's such a Joe Biden response to give there. You have the CEO of one of these major airlines, one of the biggest ones in the entire country, and basically his response to consumers is just to say this level of disruption and uncertainty is unacceptable. I mean, yeah, it is unacceptable, and you're the guy responsible for this. So what the fuck are you doing? You're saying this as if it's some plea that, the universe will fix the situation right now. I mean, it's the same thing as, Joe Biden coming out and in response to Roe v. Wade going and telling people to vote, or, Nancy Pelosi going out and reading poems and then singing on the steps of the Supreme Court. I mean, just utter useless, pathetic deflection from the actual core root of the problem, which in this case is pretty clearly, at least in my opinion, corruption and greed from a lot of these airline companies who basically got billions and billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies throughout the pandemic, which was supposed to be put in place to make sure that they could protect their employees, to maintain their jobs for the future, so that once the demand for air travel started to tick up, as COVID started to tick down, that then they would be able to seamlessly adjust to that and resume the flight patterns as were the case in a pre-COVID world. So, I mean, that was the whole idea of the billions of dollars, roughly $50 billion that went to the airline industry. And so the question is, why the fuck is this happening? I mean, where did this money go? Did it actually go towards protecting their employees? I mean, to some degree, maybe some people's jobs were protected by this money, but in a larger sense, it seems like a lot of this money was really geared towards, protecting the executives, protecting the shareholders for a lot of these corporations. And they, in the meantime, a lot of these corporations were pressuring a lot of their pilots to retire early so they could slash money that they were having to pay out to their employees. So, I mean, top to bottom, this is a case of a corporate slush fund being given to these corporations and them using and abusing it, similar to every other corporation that got money throughout COVID. So it seems like it's a pretty simple situation here. If you have a shortage of pilots, if you have a shortage of baggers or flight attendants, then offer people better pay and start to bring in more workers. I mean, it's not that complicated, but in order to address some of the issues here, you would have to actually cut into a lot of the profit margins that these corporations have been seeing recently. And so what are the solutions to this? Well, Bernie Sanders has a couple of solutions here from Vice News. Bernie Sanders has a plan to end flight delays and cancellations, find their asses. And it might seem, pretty simple, but this would be effective. We've seen this effectively deployed against other industries in the past, and there's no reason to believe that this wouldn't be effective in motivating these corporations to stop lying to consumers and actually produce the situation necessary to stop having this amount of cancellations and delays. But just to give you more of a detailed insight into exactly what he is calling for, so he has basically a three-pronged plan in a letter that he sent to Pete Buttigieg, where he's asking him to require airlines to promptly refund passengers for flights that have been delayed for over an hour, and impose fines on airlines for flights that are delayed more than 2 hours. And then finally, and this is what I think is the biggest one, impose fines on airlines for scheduling flights that they are unable to properly staff. So this is part of the reason that so many people are showing up to the airport ready to go on their vacation or go take a trip to see their family members or whatever. This is the reason why you are showing up to the airport and finding out that your flight is canceled or delayed indefinitely. It's because these airlines are basically putting together flight schedules that are physically impossible for them to maintain, given the level of staffing that they actually have at their companies. And part of the reason they're doing this is because they don't want to have less people buying their tickets. They don't want to have to go through this process of admitting reality and admitting the flaws of the strategies they have put in place throughout the pandemic. And so they're instead choosing to basically just lie to passengers and then figure it out on the back end and give people like, tickets for future flights or subsidies for future flights, or maybe mild give backs or paybacks or refunds to a lot of these consumers. But I mean, at the bottom line is, if you know that you're not going to be able to staff these flights, you shouldn't be giving out tickets to those flights. And so basically his proposal here is you're going to be fined $55,000 per passenger if they cancel flights that they know that they cannot fully be staffed. I think that that's completely and entirely reasonable, because again, we're talking about fraud here, okay? We're talking about billion-dollar corporations who are lying to consumers, telling them that flights are available that they know goddamn well are not going to be available. It's straight up fraud. And so, $55,000 per passenger seems to be a pretty reasonable measure that has been put forward by Bernie Sanders. John Fetterman, I think he proposed roughly like 25,000. So Bernie going with the larger proposal here. But now we get to the response from Pete Buttigieg, who, just as a reminder, is the guy who would actually be able to enforce those policy measures. His entire job is making sure that there is somewhat efficient transportation and travel around the United States. This is exactly what his job is. It is to hold corporations accountable in regards to the transportation sector. So here we have a case study QB clip on exactly what his thoughts are.
On Wednesday, Senator Bernie Sanders called for fines up to $55,000 per passenger if an airline cancels a flight due to staffing shortages.
Is the situation so bad that DOT should start fining airlines?
We have fined airlines where they've failed to provide refunds or treat customers well in other ways.
But not for canceling a flight for staffing.
Right. So there are other authorities that we may have, and we're going to look at it. But what I'd much rather do is just have a good outcome so that we don't even have to go there. It's clear that the airline sector is not ready to meet public expectations, and I'm concerned about that.
Whose fault is that?
I'm not interested in the blame game. I'm interested in making sure that passengers can get to where they need to be.
Oh, right.
Okay, but how the fuck are you going to do that? What is your actual plan to make sure that passengers can get to where they need to be? I mean, I could not even have written up a more pathetic response to the actual question that was being asked there. The question was, are you willing, as the head of the Department of Transportation, are you ready and willing to impose fines on corporations who are lying to consumers on flights that they know that they're going to have to cancel inevitably? And his response to that is to say, well, we have a multitude of policies that we're looking at, and I don't want to play the blame game. Play the blame game. There's an identifiable piece of this puzzle that is to blame. It is the corruption, the greed of these airline corporations who are committing fraud right in front of your eyes. And just as a reminder here, we also had that story that dropped that Pete Buttigieg, after he did this session with these CEOs of these big airline companies where he did the Joe Biden thing and basically asked them to do better without actually imposing any accountability measures or even threatening accountability measures. He did that conference with these CEOs, and then his flight got canceled back to Washington, D.C., and he had to drive home like a little bitch, okay? And he turns around and he's not even willing to play the blame game. What do you mean? It's not about just playing the blame game. It's about holding them accountable for their actions and actually making sure that there is an enforcement mechanism to make them adjust their practices, make them adjust their policies so that they fall in line. Your entire job is to do that, but instead he's taking this hands-off Joe Biden-esque approach to the situation where it's like, we're just going to let the market sort it out. We're just going to appeal to these CEOs and write them strongly worded letters and plead with them on national television like completely pathetic losers and politely ask them in order to fix their policies so that mass cancellations aren't happening and affecting thousands and thousands of Americans during especially like holiday weekends and shit. I mean, it's just completely fucking pathetic. I'm not ready to play the blame game. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. This is somebody who is a top representative of the federal government whose entire job is to play the blame blame game on corporations who are failing to meet the needs of people who are traveling across the country. But another piece of this that I talked about in one of my more recent videos, U.S. Transport Chief says that he will be watching the airline performance over the July 4th weekend. So this was part of that same meeting that he had with the airline companies. He basically said, I'm not ready to enforce any accountability measures on you guys. Let's just, fix it before July 4th. And if you guys do better then, then we won't have to actually impose any consequences. Well, July 4th has come and gone, and surprise, surprise, they didn't do shit to fix anything. Okay, so again, there really shouldn't be any surprises here, but Washington Post points out July 4th travelers face thousands of flight delays and cancellations. So, I mean, you have your answer here. I mean, you have Pete Buttigieg, the head of the Department of Transportation, who is basically taking actual policy measures, actual enforcement mechanisms that could be put in place to fix the current problem at hand, to hold these massive billion-dollar corporations accountable for, in my opinion, what could be considered criminal actions in regards to lying to consumers. But on top of that, you have this Department of Transportation head who is completely defanged, who is a neoliberal shill and a ghoul for corporate America, who is basically doing this hands-off approach and asking them politely to fix the situation, where that's not going to do anything. I mean, you can never, I mean, this is the same thing as like, Joe Biden going to fossil fuel companies right now and saying, it's your patriotic duty to lower gas prices for the American people. Like, what the fuck do you think that's going to do? It's not going to do anything. These are profit-driven entities. They will put their profits ahead of every other priority imaginable, okay? The only way that you can actually fix the problem is by holding them accountable, imposing those fines that Bernie Sanders and John Fetterman were proposing, and get them to fall in line, okay? They are never going to do this of their own accord. They're never going to do this by their own volition. You have to make it happen. That's what your entire job description is, but instead we just have this neoliberal hollow ghoul who isn't willing to do absolutely jack shit to fix not only this problem in regards to airline disruptions, but also the issues with transportation in the United States generally. I mean, we have one of the most pathetic transportation networks in the entire world. You want to compare to other countries like China is a great example. Go look at what China has done over the last 2 decades with their high-speed rail networks and their public transportation. I mean, we have done less over the last 100 years than China has done in the last decade in terms of public transportation. I mean, it's a complete fucking embarrassment. We have crumbling infrastructure. Our infrastructure frequently gets graded at like what, a D+ to a C- by the American Society of Civil Engineers. That's the situation we have with the Department of Transportation and what their priorities are right now. And this is a guy who has future like presidential ambitions. Okay, it's completely pathetic. He's defanged and he has absolutely no actual policy solutions to the current problem that Americans are facing in regards to transportation.